Halfland, an ahistorical prehistory. The Battle of Lordsgrave. As the 111th year of the Common Reckoning drew to its close, Katla, the self-proclaimed voice of heaven and priestess queen of all the dwarves, marched with her starving followers to make war on Asta, the queen of the dwarves of the Dark Hills. Katla's host numbered around 300. Some 75 of these were well-equipped, experienced fighting dwarves, the majority of whom had previously served Katla's husband, Olvir. These dwarvish warriors were either equipped with crossbow or with mail and spear and shield, and served as Katla's personal bodyguard. The remaining dwarves of Katla's host were miscellaneously equipped with random hand weapons. Some of these wore mail, some bore shields, some were unprotected, and some were literally naked. But they were all fanatical in Katla's cause. Opposing them was the well-fed, well-equipped army of Asta, consisting of nearly 250 armoured dwarves. Approximately 2/3 of these were armed with spear and shield, while the remaining third bore crossbows. Much to her mother's displeasure, Asta had chosen to lead this army to battle in person. Katla's host marched eastwards along a valley. To the left, the precipitous slopes of the great mountain named Lordsgrave soared skywards. To the right rose a more gentle slope, capped with trees. As the army reached the head of the valley, the ground to their right opened up, but another wooded hill rose in front of them. This was the ground that Asta had selected for the battle, and here it was that the well-ordered ranks of Asta's dwarves stood, silently awaiting their foes. Asta had positioned her crossbow dwarves atop the hill facing Katla, under the eaves of the forest crowning it, and between that hill and the slopes of Lordsgrave she had arrayed her spear dwarves. In contrast to the army of Asta, Katla's host was neither well-ordered nor silent. In its centre was Katla, surrounded by her bodyguard, which at least attempted to maintain its cohesion. But surrounding them was a haphazard crowd of dwarves, each marching at his own preferred pace. However, while Katla's army was not arrayed in neat ranks and files, it sang in unison as it marched, sang songs of praise to the old gods, and to the true king, and to the voice of heaven. Confronted by Asta's army, Katla's dwarves stopped marching and ceased their singing, and, as the echoes of song and tramping feet died away, Katla's voice rose above the silence, screaming abuse and curses at Asta and her army, screaming that they were kingslayers and sacrilegious hoarders of food and gold, screaming that they must all die so that evil could be washed away, screaming that only so could a new world be brought into being, a blessed new world, a new world of peace and plenty, a new world populated only by true believers. And Katla's followers cried out that it must be made so, and surged forward. Asta's dwarves chose to remain silent, and let their crossbow strings do the singing. And those crossbow strings sang, and several of Katla's charging host fell to the earth, never to rise again. But still Katla's fanatics came on. Seeing this, Asta ordered her spear dwarves forward to close with the screaming horde rushing at them. Katla's frenzied followers individually flung themselves at the relentless advancing wall of Asta's well-equipped and well-drilled spear dwarves, but to no avail. this fight was entirely one-sided, and Katla's left flank was obliterated. Meanwhile, in the centre, things were not going so well for Asta. Her crossbow dwarves atop the hill had kept their nerve, loosing crossbow bolts at the onrushing enemy right until the last moment. As a result, relatively few of the first wave of fanatics had managed to close with the crossbow dwarves, who had therefore been able to hold their own in the ensuing melee. But now a second wave of attackers barrelled into the fight, and the crossbow dwarves were being overwhelmed. Asta regathered her spear dwarves and split them into two groups. The first group advanced toward Katla and her bodyguard. Asta remained with the second group, ordering it to turn left and charge to the assistance of her hard-pressed crossbow dwarves. Asta and her spear dwarves had some initial success, but they joined the fight too late to save the remaining crossbow dwarves, and as the last few crossbow dwarves were being sent to meet their ancestors, more and more of Katla's dwarves could turn their attention to the spear dwarves with Asta, who found themselves being outfought. The spear dwarves fell back and formed a shield wall in front of Asta. A group of Katla's fanatics managed to circumvent this and attack Asta and her immediate retinue. Simultaneously, yet more of Katla's adherents crashed into the ranks of Asta's shielding spear dwarves, who, thus engaged, were unable to come to Asta's assistance, and, for a time, Asta's life was in peril. But Asta was made of stern stuff. Although her shield was hewn by many axe strokes, she managed to extricate herself from her predicament, and she and her spear dwarves fell back, and the shield wall was reformed. Once more Katla's frenzied followers charged, and still more of Asta's spear dwarves fell. Very few now remained to protect their queen, and Asta's position was desperate. But Katla's position was worse. You will recall that Asta had ordered a group of her spear dwarves to advance toward Katla and her bodyguard. This they had done, to devastating effect. Katla's bodyguards were killed or scattered, and Katla found herself in a similar position to Asta. But whereas Asta stood strong and fought off those who assailed her, Katla cowered behind the shields of her remaining bodyguards. And even as the few spear dwarves who still stood before Asta fought fiercely to protect their queen, Asta's other group of spear dwarves advanced again, and the last remnants of Katla's bodyguard were killed, and Katla fled, pursued by a group of Asta's spear dwarves. Witnessing the flight of their priestess queen, Katla's remaining fanatics paused in their assault upon Asta and her shield wall. This respite enabled Asta and the spear dwarves with her to retreat and rejoin the main body of her forces. Katla stumbled, and the pursuing spear dwarves fell upon her and slaughtered her, even as she knelt before them, begging for mercy. And seeing this, Katla's remaining followers flung themselves at Asta's spear dwarves in a frantic attempt to avenge her. But it was not to be. Asta's retinue escorted her in safety from the field, leaving her combined spear dwarves to deal brutally with this last charge. Asta's victory was complete, but it was hard earned. Many of her brave fighting dwarves lay dead, but not a single dwarf of Katla's entire host survived that day. Thus ended the Battle of Lordsgrave.